function of printing money and subtracting money, it permanently impairs the monetary instrument, the dollar's ability to coordinate trade effectively. And that mechanism, the dollar, impairs and impairs and impairs, ultimately to a point where it's no longer functional at all, and that's when hyperinflation happens. That I think most people assume that hyperinflation happens because they just printed too much money, but in reality, it's the printing of money that impairs the ability of humans to trade, and what that translates to is an impairment of the ability to deliver real goods and services that you need on a daily basis that actually have to be produced on a marginal basis, because there is a fundamental difference between an existing asset base that exists, like that home existed, versus I need to build a new home and I need to coordinate all of the inputs to a home, or I need to coordinate all of the inputs to an oil well or to a gas well or to a pipeline. That there are a number of marginal things that you need to consume every day that need to be delivered every day in order for us to stay in our current standard of living. And the printing of money functionally impairs that, and it degrades over time, and then it ultimately fails to work. That's what's happened, in my view, in every instance historically of hyperinflation, and it will ultimately happen in the case of we're in the middle innings of it, of the dollar, and that eventually the currency itself fails, and failing means the inability to coordinate trade, and that's the path that we're on. And so when I described it as creating economic chaos, it is really at its most basic level mucking up the system or impairing the instrument that coordinates trade, and we're on this very precarious path where it will no longer work at some point in time once a critical mass of humans figure out just exactly what's happening.
Another challenge with printing money is that it's not distributed back to everyone equally, or it's basically dispersed, picking winners or losers based on policymaker decisions. And obviously in different eras that can favor different groups. It also generally favors debtors over savers because more money is being created, but all the debts are still denominated in the prior unit. One way to quantify it is that something like 6 trillion, and it's gone down a little bit, but like something like 6 trillion new broad money was created since the start of 2020. And so it's not just, bank reserves. It's actually, it's being created, but then it was also dispersed out into the broad money supply due to, just various fiscal programs. And if you divide that by the number of households in the United States, it's about 130 million households. So if you do the math, it's something like $46,000 per household. And so if you're a household and if you go back and say, okay, how much did I get from the government? You add up the stimulus checks, you add up child tax credits, things like that. Does it come anywhere near 46,000? And of course the answer is no. And there were, on the other hand, PPP loans. Everyone talks about the stimulus checks. I think that PPP loans are under talked about because, businesses could apply for $250,000, $1 million, $2 million. I forget the exact upper limit. It was like $1 million or $2 million. You could apply for these massive loans that then get turned into grants. They just get forgiven. And you had to sign up and say, okay, I'm going to pay my employees. This is necessary to continue operations. But a lot of businesses got them, they were kind of structured around the idea of like an independent restaurant. They're told to shut down, but we don't want them to go out of business, so we're going to give them a grant to keep going. And a few people would criticize that specific application. But when you actually look at what happened, there was like law firms and like investment firms. They were like, yeah, we need the money to like pay our employees. And they didn't lose profits. And so all that money just goes straight to the owner's bottom line because he's like, oh yeah, I paid that to the employees, but that just means that the income that they got just got to go up to them. And so a lot of cases you had millionaires get, $250,000, $500,000 injections right to their net worth, while, the typical American got a few $1,000s in stimulus checks and a few $1,000s in child tax credits. And so basically you siphoned off everyone's savings, and then you could redirect it in certain ways. A similar thing happened during the global financial crisis where they bailed out banks, but they didn't bail out homeowners to nearly the same degree. Yeah. And, even like if you have liquidity in their moment where no one else has liquidity, like if everything's like selling off due to fire sale prices and the dollar's soaring and things are getting crushed, and you give out liquidity key institutions that can go and like, basically buy things or make really good loans and things like that, then they come out of that stronger than ones that weren't given that sort of lifeline. In addition, during the pandemic, I mean, if you, let's say you were a gigantic restaurant corporation, you have access to public capital markets. The Fed was in there keeping the bond market liquid, right? They were literally buying corporate bonds. They were keeping the bond market liquid. Whereas if you were a small restaurant, individual, like, just a family-run restaurant, you're trying to get credit and trying to, get liquidity, keep going in that environment, a lot of banks would just say no, and the Fed just doesn't have the logistics to go around and help every mom-and-pop restaurant out there. It kind of inherently favors these larger entities. And so basically by having that public ledger that can then be, drained and directed in certain ways, it's easy to either purposely or accidentally direct it towards people that are already near the top of the system.